Thank you all for joining us. I don't know, Monet, can you see, or Patrycja, if our panelists are all here?
Yes, I believe everybody is here. Welcome. So great to see you all. Yes, we've got all our panelists here, and I know Monet will, after we do our welcome, we'll pin us all.
Perfect. So I think we can go ahead and get started.
Great, so I can kick us off. Just first of all, I want to welcome everybody. For those of you just joining us, we've had a great morning at our Equity and Graduate Education Summit. We had an opening and a session on cross-racial mentorship, and you're here now for the Wellness is an Equity Issue session. And I just want to start us off with a land acknowledgement. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the ancestral homelands of those who were here before and those who are still here. So the University of Washington and all of our institutions exist on Indigenous land wherever you are zooming in from today. And in our time together, want to keep in mind the integrity of this territory, where area Native peoples identify as the Duwamish, Suquamish, Snoqualmie, and Puyallup, as well as the tribes of the Muckleshoot, Tulalip, other Coast Salish peoples and their descendants. We're grateful to live and work on these lands and to follow leadership from our community members who are Native and Indigenous, particularly those here from those named territories. So this land acknowledgement is just one small act in an ongoing process of working to be in good relationship with the land and the people of the land. So I will pass it back to Associate Dean of Equity and Justice, Relina Joseph.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you all for being here today. Really excited about this. I'm excited about all these sessions, but I'm particularly excited about this session. Wellness is an equity issue. And I just wanted to let you know that the full bios of everyone are in the program. So I'm not going to go through the full bios, but I just wanted to briefly introduce the folks that you're going to be hearing from today. And Monet's going to be nicely pinning them, so you can choose speaker view if you'd like to be able to see the speakers as well. We will have the opportunity for questions and at the end. So you can, if you'd like to, during the session, you can populate the chat with questions, or you can raise your hands at the end as well and hold on to those questions. And as Patrycja has said, we are trying to keep a Twitter record of this. So if you are a tweeter, please tweet at Equity Justice. You'll see there's a little stream developing there. So we are going to hear today, our moderator is Patrycja Humienik, who is our office is the Office of Equity in Grad Programs, Equity and Inclusion Specialist. And our speakers today are Indigenous Wellness Research Institute and Social Work Professor Mike Spencer, and graduate student Kaleb Germinaro from the UW's Resilience Lab, as well as the College of Education, Aliyah Turner from the Sociology Department, and Danielle Brown from the Geography Department. So without further ado, I believe I am going to actually pass the mic over to Kaleb first, who is going to lead us in a wellness exercise.
Cool. Thanks, Dr. Joseph. So I put in the chat also the Native Land website, so folks who are not in the Seattle area can check and see whose land they're on, so you can learn about the folks who inhabit those areas. So one thing I'm going to ask everyone to do for this mindfulness exercise is to turn off your videos and go outside for 3 minutes and go enjoy the sun. If you're not in the Seattle area, weather permitting, please go take some time to get outside. If you can't get outside and don't have like a yard or a front porch or something like that, go enjoy the view from your window and take 3 minutes and do that. So I'm gonna turn my video off so I can go do that and let my dog out too.
For those just joining us, Kaleb just invited us to step outside. And Kaleb is prompting us to detail something that you noticed when you stepped outside or looked out the window in the chat. Feel free to drop that in the chat.
Thanks everybody for indulging me in getting us outside. I think as far as like mindfulness goes, there's a lot of different things that folks do. And one of the things that we at least do at the Resilience Lab is like honoring our self-compassion and being kind to ourselves. So notice how much and thank your body, right? When you were outside, like, did you notice how your body was feeling, the stress that you're carrying, and thanking your body for all the things that it allows you to do, while also all the things that it carries for you so you can persist, right? So I just want to note that self-compassion and being kind to ourselves is something that we often are bad at. And the idea of self-compassion is extremely important in healing our bodies too. So, and I see the chat populating. So community and building community in some type of self-compassion and being kind to each other and ourselves is also extremely important. So just wanted to take the time to do that.
Thank you, Kaleb, for grounding us with that. I'm loving seeing the chat fill up with some noticings from everybody. I have done the Be Real training before, and I would love for people who don't know about the Be Real program for you to tell us a bit about that, and also, this exercise you just grounded us in, telling us a little bit more about why you think those kinds of grounding practices matter.
Yeah, so the Be Real program is actually run by my boss, Megan Kennedy, who's the director of the Resilience Lab. And she runs that it's a 6-week program that meets for about an hour and a half a week. And it is made to essentially like enhance the focusing on like yourself and your abilities. Then and the goal is to like increase self-compassion, mindfulness, resilience, all those different types of things. And Dr. Joseph has been in the Be Real training, our most recent group. And I think the importance of this type of work is everybody deals with stress and trauma and things differently, right? And so everybody's mindfulness or resilience or the ways that they love themselves and care about themselves and others looks completely different. And so it's not a matter of just like learning about it, but learning about what it looks like for you. And I think that that is one of the more difficult things that a lot of us go through, as far as finding out like what works for us, as far as how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of others, which is, I think, a little bit easier sometimes, because quite often we are much bigger critiques of ourselves than other people. And so I think that it's a talent and a skill set that is constantly learned and relearned over time as well.
That's so great. I think we might circle back to some of this as our conversation goes on. And I see Monet put a link to the Resilience Lab in the chat. Maybe I'll open it up, move over to this question to Mike as well, in hearing about the center that you run as well, and strategies and resources that you advise for helping with student wellness, particularly BIPOC grads. If you can orient us in the work that you do, Michael, and connection to what Kaleb was just sharing.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to start off by saying aloha, good morning. My name is Mike Spencer. I'm a professor in social work, and I'm also the director of Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Oceanic Affairs at the Institute for Research on Indigenous Wellness. And one of the things I wanted to first start off by saying is that our Wellness Institute is primarily a research institute. So we don't provide a lot of sort of direct services to students, but all of us work with grad students primarily and mentor them pretty closely. We work with undergraduate students as well, and have extensive partnerships and ties within communities. So I can share a little bit more about what the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute does on a more sort of personal or individual level, interpersonal level, but on a more larger level within our School of Social Work. I think you know, I've been at the School of Social Work here for about 3 years now, but I was at another institution for about 22. And one of the things that, you know, I see that makes a huge difference as far as students and resilience and all of that is just the supports that we're able to offer them. We have an incredible student support services office. And I think that it all starts there. But, you know, specifically with regards to students of color, you know, we are so fortunate that we have a larger, diverse student body in our school. But what that means is also greater responsibility, right? We also have a set of values that we uphold within our school, and it's super important that we uphold those values, you know? So the kinds of things that we're talking about here today are the kinds of things that are central, not only to our school, but to our research and the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute. And that is to not only address sort of the structural racism and the settler colonialism that impacts our students on a daily basis, but really to provide them opportunities to see where our communities have been resilient, how we are resilient, and how we can continue to be resilient in the future as well. So I'll just pause there. I have a lot of other things to say, but I know I want other people to have an opportunity to speak as well. So thank you.
This is great. Yeah, we'll circle back. And this makes me think, I want to throw it back to Kaleb. You know, you were starting to share about the Be a Real work, but I know you have a larger role within the Resilience Lab. And I know Mike was just sharing that word resilience, which I want to note is often I think as all these panelists have talked about and think about in their research, is often a tricky word because there's also the structural factors that demand resilience unfairly, disproportionately on our campus of our BIPOC grads. So maybe Kaleb, you could speak a little bit of the work you do at Resilience Lab and on this term resilience. And then if any of the other panelists want to speak about this word resilience, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think to start to provide context kind of where resilience kind of took off, as far as like a term, kind of started out of folks like Martin Seligman, who was doing positive psych work at the University of Pennsylvania. And then it kind of really took off, at least in the field of like education, when Angela Duckworth wrote her book Grit, which quite often very much negated the sociocultural factors that folks were experiencing. And so that gets at what Dr. Spencer was talking about, the structural racism and the ways that racism, sexism, homophobia, all those different isms, right, that folks are dealing with in regards to their resilience or ability to bounce back from getting knocked down, essentially. And so at the lab, I think that's kind of a lot of what our work is trying to do, is like dismantle that singular definition of exactly what resilience is, and it being associated strictly with grit, but rather better understanding how people make sense of their own stress and trauma, and how we can like undo that or set the bar higher as far as how we take care of students, faculty, and admin at the university. So what does that actually look like at like a holistic well-being, instead of just actually touching on the after effects of when someone gets knocked down? So it's more on the preventative side of like, how do we set the bar higher for what our well-being should and could be.
Thank you for contextualizing that. Do any of the other panelists want to share about this word resilience? I know we haven't gotten a chance yet to hear Aliyah and Danielle. I'll be excited to hear more about your roles in this work, but if you have any initial thoughts on this resilience conversation, feel free to pop in.
You know, the only thing that I'll add to what Kaleb said was that, you know, the idea of you know, I think the language that we've used in the past around sort of inequities has been disparities, right? And we've looked at sort of, okay, well, how, you know, that sort of connotates that we need to reduce the gap, you know, that we need to sort of be at that same level. But, you know, as we see where the majority population is, they're not that healthy either, you know? And our people, when I talk about our people specifically, I talk about my native Hawaiian people, you know, prior to colonial contact, we were very healthy people. We knew a lot about how to be healthy, you know, and we've lost those things, you know, and I think, you know, that's when I talk about sort of, you know, this idea of using our culture and embedding ourselves within our culture, that's partially what I'm talking about. You know, it's a part of this is we're experiencing trauma right now in the midst of this pandemic. And I think what's important for us to understand is that, you know, I think I've been using the word survivalence. I know I've made it up. I made it up, but I think it's been used in other contexts as well. And I think that, you know, we forget that that is resilience. You know, that too is resilience. Every day that we wake up, that we breathe, that we interact with the world, and we sometimes get knocked down, you know, and sometimes we get picked up. But that's part of being resilient every single day. And, you know, just recognizing that and remembering that we all come from resilient people, and that our communities have been absolutely resilient, and that, you know, like Kaleb said, our job now is to uplift and go beyond. You know, let's go beyond closing the gap. Let's like shoot for even higher excellence, because that's what our people always shot for.
Yeah, if I could. Hi folks, I'm Aliyah, she, her. I just want to like emphasize a point that I think Kaleb made. I think for me, resilience is deeply rooted in resistance. And I just want to say that it doesn't have to look linear across anyone. I think often when we think of resilience, when we think of resistance, we think of, how well are we agitating? How well are we fighting? How well are we deploying resources and advocating and constantly fighting the good fight? And I think more often than not, especially these days where we still have twin pandemics, where we still have state-sanctioned violence, where Black and brown folks are still being killed by the state, and accosted on the streets and in schools, and we have a national health crisis and a vaccine that is just now becoming a little bit more accessible. We have to remember that, like, we aren't at full capacity, right? Like, we don't have the same tools and armament to get through in the ways that we could get through before, and that's okay. And like, let's lean into that, and let's let us allow resilience to be radical self-care and rest, choosing to have an off day or off days, choosing to not be on email, choosing to have your screen off during Zoom. So just kind of reframing how we're thinking about resilience, I think, is really important for me these days, and really good on my mental health, and allowing myself grace when I don't feel like my resilience is necessarily leading to like structural changes that I want to see, but still are helping my health and helping me make it to another day and get through, and fight a little bit harder as I move forward, and be a little bit more encouraged to get through and be sustained in those efforts. I think has everything to do with your resilience, and just know that, like, it may not fit the mold of what it has in the past. It may take a different shape, but you are doing it, each and every day that you claim as your own, regardless of what you do that day, is your resistance. So that's just what it means to me, and how I've been thinking about it in this moment that we're in.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up what everyone else said. Hello, I'm Danielle Brown. It's very nice to be on a panel one with two people I know so well, Aliyah and Kaleb, and it's nice to meet you, Michael Spencer. Me and Aliyah, we've talked a lot over the past year about this idea of, I think resilience, self-compassion as a Black woman. And I would definitely say, I think one of the ways in which I've rethought a lot this idea of resilience over the past year is actually really centering this idea that my strength is in my weakness, and knowing where my weaknesses lie. And I think that for me, like Aliyah said, so much my resilience these past few months have actually been in really centering that my humanity is not solely based in my strength. I think Black and brown communities are people, we continually go back to we're a strong people, and I think that is great, but I think then it doesn't give you the ability to have faults and weaknesses and insecurities. And I think this past year has really shown me that that's actually the parts of myself that I have to work on the most. It's not me being able to stand up for myself, or like Michelle spoke so wonderfully about in the first panel, this idea of like, as Black and brown individuals being able to talk about race. Like, those aren't always our issues. Sometimes I think it's about stepping back and realizing that it's not always my day to fight. And sometimes, it's my day to take care of myself and get myself to a place where I can fight for others. But first, it's about focusing on myself and my mental health.
I really appreciate the connections. I was taking some notes between what you all were saying, Kaleb, about sort of raising the bar of what wellness means, and that fragment from Mike I popped into the chat about every day we interact in the world. Two, that is resilience, Aliyah's framing of radical self-care and rest, and just acknowledging the pandemic, the dual pandemics that we're in, and this note from Danielle about centering that my humanity is not solely based in my strength. I'm really loving the connections between these. And I'm wanting to hear from you all about, I've heard a little glimpse about self-care, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone about like what what wellness, the role of wellness in your lives looks like, but also how you're engaging in community care at the same time, because I'm really hearing that both of those are connected and important to you. So either if maybe we can start with hearing more from Danielle and Aliyah about the role that wellness plays in your lives and how you're not just taking care of yourselves, but engaging in community care.
Yeah, I can start off. I would say, well, first, definitely last year was my first year as a master's student at UW and being located in Seattle, which is heavily white. It was very difficult. Last summer, I found it interesting. And when we talk about wellness as an equity issue, I really realized the difference when I came back to school this past year. And I was talking to some other grad students about their experiences during the summer. And not that they didn't have various experiences themselves, but there was a lot of talks about road trips and good times. And when it came to me, I was in bed. Like I was sad, I was crying, I was mourning. And one thing I realized is that I am in a relationship with a white man. And when this summer hit, I realized that, no one person can fulfill all of the care I need. And that I needed to go to other communities to get that care I needed that, quite frankly, my boyfriend just could not give me because he couldn't understand my experiences. And so I think I found that a lot in a fellow woman like Aliyah, who we showed community care by just being there for one another and not putting the pressure to talk all the time, but really we just sat like every few weeks, like I send you strength, I send you love. And I know we've talked before about how it was really nice to not have that pressure to always show up, but just to know that you were on someone's mind. And I would also say I found a lot of community and some advocacy work on campus, where I got to know Kaleb, and just really also finding like my poetry side. I got into poetry and painting, and I think I showed up for my community in that way. I did a Black Joy Festival in September last year, and for me, that was really, I don't know, when I talk about showing up for my community in terms of taking care of myself first, but knowing when I do have the ability to step up for others, and realizing that I think so much I've learned that you're told so much that you lack value and worth and you don't have something to say. And so really with my poetry, it's really been nice to be able to connect with my community in that way and just share about the Black experience. Yeah, has been very fulfilling for me this past year.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Danielle. I was about to like shout out your poetry as well if you didn't bring it up, because it's dope. And follow her on Instagram. You should totally like drop your Instagram, Twitter handles. But for me, I think within this past year, something that has been grounding has been really, quite frankly, teaching. It's been a moment of not only being in academia and thinking about my labor being extracted from me, but like creating and curating a space as a facilitator that is simultaneously learning from my students and changing what academia has felt like to me as a Black woman for those students. And that has been really gratifying, because change always feels like something that is so slow to come by. And sometimes it's exhausting being in the world and thinking about the way the world is, but like really having moments where like, me and my students can like talk about what's really affecting them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be statistically significant or represented in the literature to matter. Just holding space for them to explore their lives and their experiences, and to come closer to feeling a little bit more seen and heard than they had been and had recognized that they hadn't been within other courses that they were taking at UW, which, to Danielle's point, like, it is a very white space. It is a space of privilege. And I think it's easy to become a part of that exclusionary bubble and not think about how the world is operating outside of that and push back against the privilege that we all occupy by virtue of being students or affiliates or employees of this university, of this institution. So I'm always grateful when we can ground ourselves with a meditative activity or a land acknowledgement or something that humbles us by virtue of that. So teaching has been such a huge thing for me, because in that teaching is so much learning and unlearning for me. Which I always say, like, unlearning is some of the most transformational learning that has to happen, regardless of if you're in a formal school or you're like learning with family or in community. Like, unlearning needs to happen. So that has been one. I think the other is really working on, like, identifying boundaries for myself, because I'm someone who has always, shown up and done things for, like, family and folks and community in a particular way, and knowing that, like, I don't have the capacity to do that. But what I can do is, like, genuinely check in with people. I think, to Danielle's point, like, I can, like, ask how you're doing and hold space for you to really tell me that, even if it's bad, because I think about so many fleeting conversations where it's just like, hey, how are you? Good. Okay, bye. Like, actually spending the summer holding space to, like, check in and be like, it's okay that it's not okay. Like, let's talk about how and why it's not okay, and, like, lean into that. Let's not continue to put up that facade like we have to be okay all the time, because it's not serving us or anyone that we care about or that we're invested in. So um you know for me, that just gave me a complete mental shift and a sense of freedom to just be able to hold space and give space to not necessarily, like, work deadlines or work commitments, but actual check-ins with people um, who needed an outlet. And one of the ways in which I did that was this really dope project that I did, and I collaborated with Danielle and some other people on. And it was this 4-part series where I had a set of critical dialogues with folks about Black identifying folks about living in a moment of precarity marked by COVID and state sanctioned violence, right? Like, what is a Black sense of place, or what is Black identity under siege in this moment that we're living in? And that was just a grounding question, and it was an open dialogue. And I was really grateful that the Real Poverty Network kind of promoted that and put it out there. And I encourage people to listen to it. I mean, I just collaborated with, like, friends and community and people that I care about, and just had open conversations. And I'm happy to share that link too, but that has been just eye-opening for me.
Yes, please do feel free to share that link in the chat, and I'll make a note to our viewers here that at the toward the end we'll have opportunity for your questions too. So I know there were so many rich pieces so far in what's been said, and if you're hoping to follow up, just make a note of your question and we'll get to them. I'm attending to so many pieces of what you both just said, and the one that I want to linger on and maybe pop over to Kaleb and Mike is about boundaries. There's all of you are holding so much for your own communities and the work that you do here at the UW. And so maybe Kaleb and Mike, you can speak to what this balance of self-care and community care and the wellness support you offer on campus looks like for you. What does boundary setting look like for you within that context?
I'm going to be frank, like, I'm trash at my boundaries. I'm, like, really, really bad. And I don't want to sit here and act like I'm good at it. I'm trying, but I'm really, really bad at it. Because I'm, like, the person who's like, somebody asks me to do something, I'm like, hell yeah, cool. Like, the work's getting done. I have energy right now. And then, like, the day comes and I'm like, I don't really have energy. And so it's hard to say no at times for me. And I'm learning that that's something that is, like, one of my favorite qualities about myself, and also one of my least favorite. And so I think, like, just being aware of that is maybe like where my boundary setting journey has like started. And so like learning how to take care of myself in that way. I think having friends that like boundary set, just like learning how they do that and saying no to things is really helpful. And also, I think the way that I show like love and care for folks is like by caring for them and providing time, which I think a lot of folks may do. And so I think that part of it is also fulfilling for me. So ensuring that I put that first if I'm going to do anything, right? Instead of like just doing the work, it's rather like, okay, this is something that I enjoy doing and like gives back to me. So for example, I coach high school football here, and we've been having our season this year and haven't had any COVID scares or nothing, which has been really nice. But like just being around youth and like not and being away from my phone for like 4 hours a day is super nice, and being off technology is really nice. Even if we're in the rain and it's freezing cold, I'm like, cool. Because these kids are absolutely beautiful, and they're also like able to process their stress and trauma that they've experienced for the last year, like with us on the field, right? So there's like, and Aliyah, Danielle, and I like all connect on like the geographies of healing and things like that, and how that's really important. So that's like a boundary setting, because I've learned from them like that this is the place that where you like fully focus and kind of get away from the other stuff so you can enjoy your time.
I'll just, Caleb, I'm terrible at it too. I think that's why I was hesitant in jumping in first. So I'm glad that you said that, and I agree that it is a lifetime of work, to learn how to say no. And I think any opportunity you can, take to learn how to do that better is great, and I don't think that it's actually, a coincidence that we have difficulty saying no. I think that there's an urgency to, what we're seeing in this world. And I know when COVID began, I mean, I kind of kept my ear to the ground, and I was hearing people, saying, well, geez, I'm going to basically shut down my research until this is over, and I was thinking to myself, what? This is like, if anything, it's, from at least for a social work researcher, this is a time that I need to be most busy. And so, I threw myself into it. And, I believe that we've made a lot of good things happen, but, I realize I've been more productive during this pandemic than others. And I feel I'm very fortunate. I'm privileged from that standpoint. I have the resources, I have a great job, all those things. But I also realized too, maybe about 2 months ago, that, I got a doctor's appointment, and my doctor is like, what happened to your health, man? Your numbers are terrible. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. And just making a more of a commitment to even reframing the idea of exercise, because I hate telling my community to exercise, say, just go out and enjoy the outdoors. Just enjoy it. Just go outside, be outside, take a walk, and just enjoy being outside, and I found that to be so useful for me, and I feel myself getting better. I've actually lost another, I'm like under 200, which is like, I don't think I was under 200 since I was in middle school. So this is amazing for me. I mean, it's a good thing over the last 2 months. And again, you have to focus on yourself at some point, right? At some point you have to say, look, if I'm not here, who's going to do the work? And I know from personal experience that because I carry a lot of that load wherever I, whatever space I'm in, that the work, will be hurt if I'm not here, so better I'm here, better I'm here, so I can be a part of this, so I can help to move things forward so I can bring the experience I've accumulated over the course of my life to say, hey, here's some things we've tried, here's some things that worked, here's some things that didn't work. But, you know, I'm at that point in my life where, yes, especially for people, you know, like I've been on so many dissertations and prelim exams and all of this kind of committees, and people always say, why are you, you know, why are you serving on so many? And I look at the list, and they're all students of color. They're, you know, LGBT students. There's, you know, first gen students. You know, they're all the students that, you know, that I represent. You know, I mean, that are part of my communities, and, you know, I can't turn people away. You know, sometimes I can be honest with them and say, hey, this is what my effort can be. Right. And that's helpful, and that's negotiative. And sometimes we talk to each other, you know, about, but, you know, for me, the mentoring is the part that's for me, that's restorative. When I can give back to other people, I get restored. And I'm like a doer kind of a person. So I know my tendency is to like be action oriented. But yeah, you know, I know most of you are young, and you may not care as much about the things that I'm talking about, but, you know, if you can start now to think about those things, you know, when you get to be my age, you know, I think you'll be in a much better place, and you'll have better habits of saying no and taking good care of yourself.
Thank you for that wise advice. And, you know, so many of us have touched on this is lifetime work. I think it's really helpful to hear people being really frank about that on this panel, about the fact that, you know, here we have folks at the UW on this panel who have so much to say, all of you, on wellness as an equity issue, but none of us in the context of dual pandemic, of institutional structural issues are experts at boundaries when at an institution that's constantly testing our boundaries, but particularly, I mean, across the power differentials of positions that we might hold, graduate student, staff, faculty member, to the disproportionate impact on our staff and faculty and students of color. So I'm really appreciating the layers that I'm hearing from you all, and the realness about that. I wonder if you might, you know, we have faculty and staff here who I know we've seen in feedback forums, the question of, you know, how do we better care for and support our BIPOC grads right now? How do those of us who aren't, you know, trained as social workers or whatnot better support our students? Is there maybe some advice or things you want faculty and staff to keep in mind in caring for grads right now during this dual pandemic, especially BIPOC grads? I'll open that up to anyone who wants to share.
Yeah, I would say I'm in the process of writing my master's thesis right now. So I think I'm definitely in a point in grad school where I'm having to produce despite low productivity levels and motivation levels, like on the daily basis. And one, I will definitely say to Michael Spencer, I was similar to you about 2 months ago. I was like, I need to get my health in check. So I don't think that's a difference in generations. I think that's with the pandemic. I completely agree. I threw myself into the activism, into, you know, my thesis, and I realized I wasn't happy doing anything that I was doing at a certain point, and I was crying a lot, saying a lot, like, I just don't like how I look. I just don't like how I feel. And so just prioritizing yourself and doing something about it. I completely understand. And then I would just say, in terms of like, I think that connects with my response to this question about what can faculty and staff do more for BIPOC grad students. I would say it's like, show up in the sense of showing that you understand that we are going through burdens. And I think that people think that has to mean doing something, as in changing realities that can't be changed. And I think it's a lot more about just showing that you I know my committee member, Vicki Lawson, who I'm very close to, she just went out of her way at certain points to just send an email and just show that, I'm thinking about you during this time. It's a rough time. A lot of there's no need to respond, but, I know that this is a rough time right now. And I think that just helps you to feel seen in a way and know that the productivity levels for BIPOC grad students are the same, but the reality is what's going on culturally and politically are having adverse impacts on our mental health. And I would definitely say something I'm going through right now is just this idea of, once again, what does showing up mean? And as grad students, a lot of the grad experience is supposed to be, seeing one another in joint study halls, passing each other in the hallways. And you also get, time with your, I think, staff advisors in a different way where you get more feedback, even if it's not, this is really practical right now because I'm in thesis time. There's not a lot of just those kind of organic conversation spaces to kind of get feedback on your work, feedback on just generally contexts of, I don't know, grad school theory. I remember I didn't realize interview questions could go in the appendix, just simple things. I think it'd be nice to open up more spaces of just giving advice to grad students during this time, I think would be helpful.
I'll chime in. Thank you so much, Danielle, for saying that, because for saying all those things. And you know, uh, I think that's just a great reminder. That yeah, you're absolutely right. These are difficult times, and made all the more difficult by the added amounts of stress that I mean, literally hit you in the face every day when you open your email or the news or social media. um the craziness just it can drive you mad, obviously. One of the things that I really want to do, I mean, there's several things that I'm working on right now. um One is, just trying to continue with my writing. I think you talked about poetry. I mean, I'm actually finding a new voice with my writing. um I've mostly published my entire career in medical journals. And so, it has not been full of uh, power or emotion, but I'm learning to write more in that way. I'm looking at solutions. Um, so I'm challenging, how do we change policies and practices to support anti-racist efforts, to support anti-bigotry? Um, I continue to mentor the best that I can, continue to speak out. I actually, found some voice in that too, I think, recently. Um, I probably should have handled it a little bit better. And I came back and apologized for that, you know? Um, but it was just it was so important for me to speak at that moment. And it's not always easy for me, even with after all these years, to do it. And so I want to model that for my students as well, to show them what it means to be there for someone, even if that means that a relationship with a colleague might need to be repaired later. um, the other thing too, we've been doing a better job with checking in on Zoom. And I think that, debriefing is also important too. I think that we sometimes forget to debrief, and we rush, we spend a lot of front end time, but then we kind of rush through the back end. And I think debriefing is always good. I think even debriefing our days are good, because so much of it, like you say, there's only so much support one can get from their partner before that runs very, very low. And perhaps even in a dysfunctional kind of way. And then the last thing that I want, well, two things. One, and this is a request for all of you out there. One is, this quarter, I really want to jump into doing a survey of BIPOC students. I'm hoping to get not only Seattle campuses, but also community colleges to look at mental health, but obviously not just mental health, but sources of resilience as well, both culturally, emotionally, community-wise, so those kinds of things. So, that's one of the things that I want to do, is give special attention to this, because I know for myself, and I hear from others, that this has been difficult. I also know reentry is going to be difficult. I don't think that we can underestimate that. When the pandemic ends, this trauma will end. It will not end. It hasn't ended for me in a long, long time. I don't anticipate this will, the vaccine will end the trauma that we experience. And so reentry, I think, is important. I think recognizing that in many ways, we've created a new environment for people of color through Zoom, and in some ways, a safer environment for us. And re-entry and the reality of going back to a predominantly white institution with predominantly white values that supports a larger system of structural oppression, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. So the extent to which we can harness that energy towards solutions, not only from other BIPOC communities, but from the woke, that's a bad word I hear nowadays, being woke, but to those people who have come to the realization over this past year that, yeah, damn, this world's a bit messed up. It's time to enlist them as allies and have them carry some of the weight, and to look at how their practices have impacted, BIPOC populations. So I don't know. Again, I got to balance this all out with self-care, but this is, I think it's urgent.
I'm excited to hear from the remaining panelists on this too. And I just, want to note a few things that have been said that feel really pertinent to our conversation, that it both the trauma of the current moment and that returning will be difficult, and also that during this time boundaries have been eroded between our home and our work. And all of you have spoken to the difficulty of saying no. I think this moment has sometimes made it even harder when we're supposedly available all the time. So I really loved Kaleb's point earlier about finding a moment that maybe you can be away from your phone. How challenging that can feel, though, in our current context. I just want to name that this session feels so rich for raising all of those concerns. And maybe the remainder of you, if there's anything else you want to add to sort of this closing advice, considerations, conversations for our faculty and staff before I open it up to the questions I see in the chat.
I'm just going to be quick, just to touch on what I put in the chat. It's the Wellbeing for Life and Learning handbook that we put together at the Resilience Lab, and it's built for faculty to learn about how to take care of their students better. So that's a resource that we put together. So it's public access too, so it's there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that resource, Kaleb, and thank you to Michael and Danielle for your comments. I think I just want to underline something that you both said that's really important for me in this moment. As obviously a grad student, woman of color, getting through this moment, is just the quality of check-ins matter so much. I think to Amanda's comment in the chat, there is an overwhelming amount of pressure on grad students to always be on their timeline, to be working on things. Danielle is working on her master's. I'm trying to get a prospectus done. It's always something that is pulling us in multiple directions. And I think this moment that we're living through, I felt the most disconnected from those things. Like, I know the significance of my work. I know it's grounded in community. I know it's important, but there has just been not only a lack of motivation, but just so many other pressing things that are happening in the world that are life and death. I don't want to say feel like life and death. They are life and death that have just pulled me completely away from that, coupled with my own increased personal responsibilities as a caretaker for my father now, my own health and trying to manage health concerns and complications, trying to be a good partner, right? Raising a rambunctious dog, all of, like all of these things that I've been prioritizing more and leaning more into because they feel safe and they're my comfort these days when the world feels very scary. And it hasn't been the academic work that has necessarily fueled me in the same way. It's also the reality that, like, I study inequities within schools, and like realizing that like remote learning is like absolutely screwing so many of these kids and unearthing so many of these class disparities that like me just going in as an objective researcher isn't real. I want to hold space for them. I want to have conversations more than I care about like findings to present at a conference or for an article. And so how can, faculty help in this moment? I think ask us how we're doing and mean it, and realize that our timelines aren't going to look the same pre pandemic or pre whatever we're battling and going through that's intensified by the pandemic, and tell us that that's okay and mean it. Like, really, it will be okay. I think yesterday I had a really important conversation with an advisor who's a white man who said, like, how are you doing? And I started to update him on my work, and he's like, no, how are you doing? And then word vomit. Like, it was like months of everything that I had been going through coming out at once. And he's like, I had no idea. Because the reality is there's not a lot of folks / we're conditioned in academia to not ask those personal questions about how we're coping, how we're managing, how the work hinges on our lived realities. And it's hard to do sometimes, right? Like the very work that was my refuge at one point right now feels so disconnected from me. And I'm thankfully getting back into it and realizing like, okay, I have something to say and I need to say it. But it's been a long time coming. It's been a really long time coming. And so I think what has been heartening for me is just having people remind me that the work will always be there, but I won't. And, historically, that's always come from my mentors of color, particularly Black women. And I think white faculty and white staff and non-Black folks, non-folks of color have to do that work too, of letting us know it'll be okay and not putting those uneven expectations on us in this moment.
Thank you for that, Aliyah, and the way that everyone's adding nuance to this conversation is so appreciated. I want to get to some of the questions in the chat that feel connected, and I also want to invite you all, if folks out there want to raise a hand and also just unmute yourself to say a question as we get to that order, you're welcome to do that as well. This question is connected to what you were just speaking to, Aliyah, about being a person in addition to the work, and the real deceivingly simple advice for faculty and staff to really ask how to do and mean it, which is actually not so simple in the institutions we're in where that's not the culture. So it's really a big culture shift that you're talking about that I really appreciate. And Thomas Locke in the chat was talking about another balance related question that you've all sort of spoken to, but if you want to add more, it's to the points around technology and cutting time away being a great strategy. It's still hard to escape coverage of, for instance, Black trauma. How do you balance the need to doom scroll versus finding time to grieve versus taking the time to feel enraged is a question that is on the table.
Well, I would say that my mental health has gotten a lot better since I've limited my doom scrolling. And I would say I definitely am still on social media, but I actually don't read the news coverage at length at this point that document the most recent. I used to feel like it was my obligation as a Black woman to read up on these Black deaths and into like in detail and like carry the weight in the morning with me. And I'm not doing my justice as a Black person to really hold space for these deaths in my body. But I realized that that's not my obligation, and I still mourn without having to know every single intricate detail of what took place. And so for me, I've definitely tried to limit. I think I still like to know kind of like the general name, general gist, but I definitely don't I don't open up articles, basically. I read headlines, and it's helped.
I think similarly, just to add really quick, I haven't watched a lot of the movies or media that's come out that's like, you know, celebrating Black folks, like the movie on Fred Hampton. I'm like, yo, I read about him. Like, I know he dies. Like, or Lovecraft Country, which I've heard is great, but I just don't have the capacity for it because it's like, yo, it's real. Like, I've been in situations, like the whole first episode. And so I just go and watch Black Panther, I'm gonna be honest. And things like that. So I try and feel like balance with what's actually going on with like some joy. That's very regularly happening as well, to hold space for that too.
Sorry, someone came in my house and my dogs just went berserk, so I just gave them a treat. I just so appreciate what has already been said here, and you know, I don't really have a whole lot to add except that you know, I think absolutely, you know, I mean, we just have to take things day to day and acknowledge the great things that we do on a daily basis, and you know, try to stay up on what's going on, but you know, not get ourselves too overwhelmed, because that is a wormhole. And I have a partner who is like the social media person, you know, and so I get fed all of that all the time, you know, and I like at some point want to say stop, you know, also because you know, I feel that, well, I would want to disclose that she's also someone who is white, and you know, I'm like, I have to be compassionate to her because she wants to learn, she wants to grow, and I'm like, stop race-splaining me, you know. I mean, I'm just like, I study this. This is what I have to deal with on a daily, you know, and I don't want to hear more when I'm relaxing in bed. So yeah, turning it on, turning it off, and always working towards solutions. That's the way that I look at it. You know, just always work towards if it's a problem, okay, great. How are we going to solve it now? What can we do to make it better? So.
Thank you all for that. I'll move us along because we've got a couple more questions. Really appreciating all of these insights. And again, some of these questions touch on things that folks have covered. So maybe I'll just take one or two responses to this one. Amanda said in the chat that she thinks some of what Danielle said address this. I feel like the question around personal action around boundaries is so difficult in the academic world when so much is expected of grad students. I'm wondering what kind of structural changes faculty and staff can be advocating for to make room for people to actually be able to set boundaries, take care of themselves without it negatively impacting them academically and professionally. So the question of structural change is a huge one. I don't know if any of you all want to take that. And I also will say that if there are folks, I know we have so many experts in our audience too, so open it up for one or two comments on this question.
You know, I just want to go back to, I put something in the chat about, you know, saying no means different things to different people, you know, and also the kind of labor that we're asked to do, you know. I constantly have, you know, female colleagues, for example, coming up to me saying, oh yeah, guess what? The department chair asked me to do, you know, plan such and such party for somebody's retirement, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, this is the kind of everyday type of oppression that people deal with. And so, you know, understanding what labor we're being asked to do as well, and what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to. Like I said, there's certain things I can't say no to, you know, I just can't. I'm not going to say no to those individuals because I know if it's not for me, I don't know where those people would go, you know, but in all other cases, you know, saying no is a good idea. But yeah, it's so hard because I've really, you know, I mean, many of us build our careers off of saying yes and being that person who will say yes, you know, and being that responsible, colonized person who will do what is being asked of them, you know? So, I mean, it's real. I just don't want to like say, I have a solution, we have a solution. It's real, it's structural. It's not you, it's not me, it's not us as an individual, it's not a personal fault that we have. It's something that is part of the air we breathe as well. So just acknowledging that.
Yeah, I will answer this question. I think Kaleb and Michael made a really good point. They both talked about just the idea of like our university experiences may look differently. So for example, many of the other people in my department chose to present at the AAG, the American Association for Geographers Conference last week. I did not. I knew months ago that I would not be in the headspace to want to present. And that is my journey looking different. But, you know, this is on my plate this week. And so this idea of what is important to me, what I prioritize, looking different and not seeing that as less value than me presenting at this academic conference and sharing, you know, what some of my research is, but like speaking with you all here and recentering myself and my wellness and my community wellness, and hopefully being a part of a transformative conversation for many faculty and staff. So I think definitely knowing that our experiences and what we prioritize may look different and supporting that. And I think that goes with, I've heard from so many, it's so sad, graduate students of color and particularly Black women of color, that they don't feel supported in their work, in the theories they want to use. And I think that is a very I was trying to think with this question because structural is big stuff. But I think something really tangible is supporting if your student wants to do a radical project or use radical theories or use different multimedia. I feel really supported that I chose to, my research is on a Black sense of place and Black placemaking in my hometown. And I've chosen to center, you know, largely Black scholars and women scholars and decolonial theorists, and having that support from my committee member and advisor, because I was really hesitant, and is this okay? I hear so much that there's this push to, center hegemonic canons, and having the ability to, have my whole piece really the foundation using Black theorists, I feel so good about. I'm able to use some of my poetry in my thesis. They've supported me expressing the Black experience in other ways than just through traditional academic, writing. And if anything said, it's good for you to use some of your poetry because it shows a part of the Black experience that you can't, put into words within maybe traditional writing. So I think there are ways that I get the academic job market part, and there are certain experiences that grad students need to have to better have a good package. But I also would say, listen to your grad student if they say that they want to do transformative work that pushes boundaries.
We've heard some really fantastic tips, strategies. I know that we're running close to time, and I want to be able to pass it back to Associate Dean Merlina Joseph, but I just want to say a big thanks to our panelists. This has been really rich. I know we could keep talking with you for hours. There's so much more I want to ask you about, but I want to thank you for everything you've already offered and the amazing work you're doing. And to everyone here today, thank you for, I've seen some great comments and questions in the chat. Apologies that we didn't get to all of them, but we will save the chat and check them out after. So I want to give my thanks, and I'll pass the mic back to Dr. Merlina Joseph.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for this really incredible conversation. I feel like I learned so much, and I need to sit with these lessons because some of these things I know, and I've had the privilege of listening to Aliyah, listening to Danielle, listening to Kaleb, but I need to believe them, and I need to center my health in the way that you all are doing in really beautiful ways. So thank you all so much. We are trying to model out wellness as an equity issue by actually stopping our conference today. So we didn't want to bombard everyone in this moment when we know that Zoom is exhausting us. So we will pick back
put
up
the threads ones
tomorrow afternoon.
We'll put the clothes in here too.
Sapna, can you pause? There you go. Okay, thank you. So we're going to pick back up tomorrow afternoon, and we'll have